Hello everybody, and we've got a new patch on our hands, and so it looks like Yoshi has heard our cries and has decided, hey, maybe we should nerf some of these gun heroes. And well, they have been nerfed, so let's get into some of the changes and talk about it. Now, very quickly, before we get into the changes, I want to talk about my event, the Deathy's Death Slam, which is tomorrow. So the first day is tomorrow. Make sure you tune in. It's going to be on my Twitch and on my YouTube, as well as another channel. But it's basically a tournament of amateurs, so it's a lot of fun, right? We've got people from Emissary, Archon, Phantom, Oracle, etc. that are playing. So it's not a pro tournament, but it's a lot of fun to watch. So make sure you tune in tomorrow, starting at 2 p.m. EST. That is July 5th tomorrow. So general changes, we're going to read them, fairly quickly. This is going to be a fairly extensive patch breakdown because there's a lot of changes to go over here. And so bear with me, it's going to be perhaps a slightly longer video. So first thing is bullet cycle time for all heroes increased by 5%, effectively reduces gun DPS globally by 5%. So this is pretty self-explanatory. Essentially, like, everyone is 5% weaker with their gun, regardless of whether they were a gun hero or not. You're going to be doing just a little bit less gun damage. Spirit bonus based on souls spent in the tree is increased by 25%. So when they're referring to the spirit bonus, they're talking about how much spirit you get for your investment, right? So when you spend X amount of spirit, before you got like a max of, I don't know, like 60 spirit or something, that's increased by 25%. I don't remember what the max was, but just FYI, it's somewhere around there. So what this means is that it's going to be a little bit easier to get a ton of spirit when it comes to late game. And it's also a buff to Boundless Spirit, because if you can get more overall Spirit, the percent increase from Boundless Spirit makes a lot more sense. Ability base damage and AP bonus damage reduced by 8%, Spirit growth unaffected, right? So what this means is that they've nerfed all of the base damage of abilities and the increased damage. So let's take Lash for an example, right? Let's get in game for a second. So if we take Lash here, right? So before, Flog did a little bit more than 60 damage. I think it was something like 70 damage or a little bit closer to that. I don't have the exact number. And when you got the 5 AP upgrade, it gave you plus 105 damage, not plus 95, right? So overall, his damage was actually nerfed by a little bit more than 8%. I believe that there's some rounding at play here, most likely. But this is a great example of stuff like that. Now, stuff that isn't affected, for example, would be Ground Strike, right? The base damage of Ground Strike is affected, but the 5 AP damage per meter plus 110% and improved scaling, this part is not affected, right? And this is the same for a bunch of heroes that have plus damage AP upgrades. Spirit gained from leveling reduced from 1.25 to 1.1. So this is a slight nerf to basically how much spirit you get just for being ahead rather than investing, right? So essentially the reason I believe behind this nerf is that part of the issue with some of the gun heroes, like for example, Mirage or Infernus, is that they got a lot of value just out of getting boons, right? So if the Infernus had 40,000 net worth, he'd have a decent amount of spirit just from leveling, which would affect his afterburn pretty significantly, even without having any spirit items at all. So now they're making it like a little bit more like you have to itemize into spirit, which I think is a great change. Ultimate cooldowns increased by 10%, affects base and upgrades. So the total CD with AP is 10% longer. I think that this is a fantastic change because I think that there's so many heroes in the game that just always have ultimate up, and it just doesn't really feel like that's the identity that ultimates should have. And I've been asking for ultimate cooldown nerfs for a really long time, so I'm personally really happy about this. And I'm wondering how you guys feel. 300 Souls Boon now gives an AP instead of an ability unlock. 600 Souls Boon now gives an ability unlock instead of an AP. Now, all that means essentially is that you don't unlock a second ability right from the first wave. So right now in the current patch, well, not current patch, in the old patch, I guess, if you got denied even one soul in the first wave, right? If you got denied one soul, you wouldn't unlock your second ability, right? So they would have their second ability while you didn't have your second ability, which was a huge disadvantage. So now this will make it so if you get denied once, it won't feel as bad. Small neutral camp bounty increased by 15%. Okay, that's nice. Zipline after taking base guardians is faster, so that's a nice buff. Rejuve changes. So bonus duration went from 4 minutes to 345. So the first rejuve only lasts 3 minutes, which I think is a great change. First rejuve was insanely oppressive. Rejuve trooper health bonus reduced from 200 to 200, 230, 260 to 170, 200, 230. So the minions won't be as tanky, which is also a good change in my opinion. However, the mid-boss total bounty was increased from 500 to 2,000, the base bounty, and then 50 per minute. So essentially it was just hugely buffed. And the shield regeneration was changed from 100 plus 8 to 50 plus 7. What this means is that it'll essentially be a lot easier to kill mid-boss early. However, the HP was increased by 15% to counterbalance that. So I don't actually know how much easier mid-boss will be to kill or not, but technically damage over time will be a little bit less necessary to get the barrier down. So it might be easier to like solo kill mid-boss for some heroes, but I guess we'll see. Mid-boss warning sound now plays at 70% HP rather than 60%, so basically you have a little bit more time to react, but the rejuve drop duration was reduced by 1 second. Mid-boss spirit resistance from abilities reduced by 10%, and the spirit resistance from items reduced by 30%, so this makes an item like All Fire that's going to do a lot more damage to mid-boss. Walker spirit resistance reduced as well. Guardians base resistance increased, right? So it's a little bit harder to take the Guardians. And the total bounty was reduced. So not only are the Guardians harder to take, they don't give as much. I believe that these changes are in order to slow down snowballing from lane, which was definitely an issue to an extent. Walker total bounty reduced by 1,000 as well. Base hero kill value reduced by 50. But the end hero kill value was increased. So when you get to late game, hero kills are worth even more, which I'm not sure was really necessary because hero kills already gave you a ton. So I'm not sure that this change is really necessary, but the base bounty, basically all of these changes combined make it so lane should be a little bit less snowbally. Comeback values are now roughly 25% stronger. This was already live, so this won't change anything. They just hadn't put it in the patch notes. Fix a bug, shooting orbs towards the end of the contested window to not register. So you guys have probably had this, but basically sometimes you'd shoot it, it would like play the sound and then it would get denied anyway. So various camera issues with Viscus's Gooball and Calico's Ava form. Hopefully this is a good change because I know Gooball has been bugged for a really long time. Fix an issue where souls were shared with anyone that punched the center sacrifice, regardless of the duration or team. I actually didn't even know about this. And then we'll fix the last bug fix. So weapon items. Restorative shot overall is buffed. I think it was kind of underwhelming, so I'm fine with the buff. Split shot has been buffed as well. Duration increased by 0.5 and the cooldown was reduced. Weakening headshot no longer has a cooldown. Swift striker, the fire rate was reduced by 2%, which I think is fine. Toxic bullets build up is now 15% harder. Blood tribute buffs overall, so now it gives you 8% spirit resist, and the life drain was nerfed by 10, which is a 20% nerf to the life drain, by the way, because it was 50 before, so reducing it by 10 is 20% less. Express shot was cooldown reduced from 4 seconds to 3 seconds, so now you only need to spend 3 seconds without shooting. And the weapon damage was increased to 165%. And finally, they fixed the kinetic carbine bug. Thank you, Yoshi. Cultist sacrifice cooldown reduced. I don't really see the reason for this because this was already quite strong. Ricochet fire rate reduced by 5% and no longer bounces off objectives. I think that this is particularly huge, but the 5% fire rate is also nice. I think that like these are great changes for Ricochet. Shadow Weave ambush fire rate increased from 30 to 35%. This item is not really bought, so I think giving it a small buff is fine. Spellslinger now only activates while in comeback. I'm not really sure exactly what this means. We'll need to test it, but if this means what I think it does, this is a huge nerf to the item because you'll only be able to start getting the stacks while you're fighting. So you won't be able to come into a fight with already max stacks of Spellslinger. So the Vitality items, Melee Lifesteal has double cooldown when triggered via light melee. Looking quickly, we see that this is the same for Life Strike, so I'm going to assume that Spirit Snatch also has a similar change, but we'll see. Rebuttal slight buff, Weapon Shielding and Spirit Shielding both got slight buffs to both the cooldown and the move speed. Reactive Barrier got a very slight buff, Guardian Ward, so basically some of the defensive items are getting very slight buffs. I don't think this will change a lot, but these items are definitely quite strong now for the most part, except Guardian Ward I think is still kind of mid, but the Spirit Shielding and Weapon Shielding are going to be pretty good, I think. Fortitude got a little bit gutted, so regen is now 2%, and it doesn't give you the weapon damage anymore when you're full health, right? So overall, the item is going to be significantly worse. Now, it's still 2% is still not nothing, and there's still not a lot of alternatives for regen. And it still gives you a lot of health. So the item's probably still going to be decent, but it's not going to be like as mandatory as it was. Veilwalker heal now scales with boons. This will probably make Veilwalker a more viable replacement to Fortitude for healing, as well as movement speed and visibility, all that good stuff. Counterspell changes are kind of crazy. Cooldown reduced by 5 seconds. It now also gives you 100 health and 8 spirit power as stats, which is insane. and a successful parry now heals you for 150 instead of giving you the spirit power. To be honest, the spirit power on parry was kind of fake because you never really got to use it anyway because it was only for such a small duration of time. So I consider this a buff to the item overall. Trophy Collector got a buff by 3 souls. I don't like Trophy Collector buffs because I'm not a huge fan of the item, but hey, maybe the item will be a bit more viable now. Inhibitor now uses the build-up proc mechanic. Debuff for duration increased by 1 second, so it now works kind of like toxic bullets, right? So it won't do it right away. Siphon bullets now grants bullet resistance instead of spirit resistance. So I guess that's, you know, they're basically changing some items that are going to give bullet resistance instead of spirit resist in order to kind of, they do this every patch basically. They're like, oh, weapon is too strong, let's give some items some weapon damage resist, bullet resist, and when spirit is too strong they do the opposite. So that's basically what they're doing here. Cheat Death also got its cooldown reduced. Witchmail got buffed, didn't really see it bought too much, so it's fine. And Unstoppable had a silencer bug fix. Now last but not least, the spirit items, and then we'll get into the hero changes. Rusted Barrel, basically 5-second cooldown buff. Disarming Hex also got the same buff. Spirit Strike, we got the same melee treatment, so double cooldown when it's a light melee. Slowing Hex now provides plus 0.5 sprint. The debuff effect stays on for longer, so it's easier to see. And Spirit Sap got a very slight buff to the spirit power reduction, which I think is a little weird considering Silence Wave is already in, like, really strong. But hey, I guess we'll see. Knockdown got a slight buff, 5-second less cooldown, and 6% ability range. There's a lot of items that have cooldown buffs here, but if you look at the next line, cooldown reduction stat is now renamed to ability cooldown reduction and no longer affects items. All existing CDR is now ability cooldown reduction. So what this means is, well, you know, your cooldown doesn't work on Warp Zone anymore. It doesn't work on Majestic Leap. It doesn't work on all of these items. And this is a pretty significant nerf to a lot of these items, right? For example, Lash likes building Majestic Leap, Warp Zone, and cooldown and would benefit from all of that. However, as a solution, they added a new tier 4 spirit item, Transcendent Cooldown. Now, this gives you cooldown reduction, ability cooldown reduction, and item cooldown reduction. And they also gave superior cooldown a 1% buff to kind of compensate, I guess. So essentially, you're spending 3,200 extra souls, mostly for the item cooldown reduction, and you get 5% extra ability cooldown. I'm not sure how good this will be, how good this item will be. On paper, I'm not really sure it's worth it, but this is a pretty significant nerf to superior cooldown itself, like very significant. Boundless Spirit, percentage spirit bonus increased by 2%, which is huge considering the other spirit changes. So Boundless Spirit will probably be like much better now. Vortex Web gives you 1 sprint, which is just like, you know, from the Slowing Hex giving you 0.5. Ethereal Shift got its cooldown reduced by 2 seconds, and a move speed while channeling increased a little bit. So a lot of these cooldown changes to the items actually kind of makes sense when you look at Transcendent cooldown, because now if you just buy regular cooldown, you won't actually have your cooldowns reduced on items. However, I worry that with a lot of these buffs to cooldowns on items and Transcendent cooldown being able to give you 30% item cooldown, some of these items might be like insanely short cooldowns. All right, so for heroes, Abrams, Shoulder Charge, tier 3 cooldown reduction increased as well. Infernal Resilience slight buff, so very slight buffs. Infernus, bullet damage growth reduced by 0.04. Afterburn DPS reduced by 13%. Still affected by the global base reductions as well. Total amount is larger than this. So like very significant nerf to Afterburn. But the Spirit Scaling got improved slightly. And the Flame Dash T2 DPS reduced by 10%. But the Spirit Scaling once again got increased a little bit. So if you want to build into Spirit for Infernus, you can, but you won't deal ridiculous amounts of Spirit damage without any investment. So Ivy actually caught a bit of a stray here. Well, I think it's somewhat justified, but I think most players won't necessarily see it that way. But Ivy was exceptionally strong in my opinion. Her bullet growth was hit a little bit, and now she no longer has Fleetfoot as a base component of her kit, right? So now Watcher's Covenant gives you that. So you need to have Watcher's Covenant active to not have your movement speed slowed by shooting. However, as a buff, it also gives you to your tethered allies, right? So your tethered allies also get the Fleetfoot effect, which is very valuable. Kelvin Frozen Shelter now freezes Urn. So very nice change. At the end of the day, no more free urns for Kelvin. I'm for that. Lady Geist got the bullet damage nerf, Essence Bomb arming time nerf, Malice health cost increase. The tier 2 was changed to more blood shards instead of damage amp, right? So now you have to go to tier 3 to get the 7% damage amp. And the Soul Exchange cast range was hit by 0.5 meters. So these are all very significant nerfs. We'll see how much it impacts her, but I think that this will be quite significant. Lash caught a little bit of a stray. So his Flawed cast range was reduced, as well as his ground strike damage height reduced. So I'm actually not too upset about these changes. I think it's fine. Lash should be more of like a mid to close range hero at the end of the day. So I'm not, too upset about them reducing kind of the area of effectiveness that he has. So we got some slight McGinnis changes. Basically, Heavy Barrage DPS was increased by 6%. Medicinal Spectre now comes out faster. The mini turrets got some slight changes, and the health per boon from McGinnis got increased. So she should be slightly better, but nothing crazy. Mirage Dinsmark now has a range limit on application 45 meters. So this is actually very significant. So you can't just like stack it at like through the map. And they fixed Mirage's Tornado getting stuck and go through walls. So I guess we'll test that. But that's actually like a buff to Mirage because it would happen pretty often. So I think Mirage probably didn't get enough nerfs. He's probably still going to be really strong, but we'll see. Paradox, gun recoil adjustments to make it smoother. I guess we'll have to test that. Pocket, just some cloak fixes, essentially. Very welcome. As a pocket player, it would get stuck pretty often. 7 got a slight nerf. Sinclair base bullet damage reduced from 20 to 17. Bullet velocity from 340 to 300. His Rabbit Hex cast range got changed. The detonation delay got increased as well. And the move speed, while bunnied, went from 22% to 36%. So now you're going to be zooming while you're bunnied, right? So this is probably going to hurt the ability quite a lot. So we'll see if Sinclair is still really oppressive. I think he's still going to be strong, but not nearly as strong. Warden only got a 0.6 base bullet damage change. I think Warden is probably going to be the final boss of this patch, since a lot of changes don't really harm him too much. And he was already very strong. And so I think he's going to be like one of the strongest heroes of the patch for sure. And Wraith got some slight changes. So card trick slow got increased by 5%. Spirit scaling got increased a little bit, so you can try to build card if you want a little bit, but that's about it. So my initial thoughts on this patch are a lot of the changes are in the right direction. There are certain changes I'm not necessarily a fan of, but we'll see. I'm really curious to see how the Transcendent cooldown change plays out. I'm a big fan that in general, cooldown reduction is getting kind of nerfed across the board. And so that's personally one of the things that I've been advocating for a long time. And so I'm happy to see that. But let me know what you guys think about this patch down in the comments. And I'm going to be playing tonight. And don't forget about my tournament tomorrow. All right. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.